A stark new warning from the Energy Department. According to new projections, Americans could face up to 800 hours of blackouts per year by 2030. That's more than a month without power, and it's raising some questions about the reliability of our electric grid.
And residents on the Sunshine Coast say they're against sending all the power from a local dam to the U.S. for 30 years.
In British Columbia, a single proposal has turned into a national story. Powell River Energy has asked Canada's energy regulator for a license to export power to the United States for the next 30 years. That would lock in supply until 2055. But what seemed routine quickly drew heavy opposition from residents, local business groups, and the Tla'amin First Nation. For Americans, the timing is striking. Washington is counting on Canadian energy to balance out shortages created by high costs and delays in its own projects. Instead of certainty, the United States is now watching as a long-term deal stumbles at the very first hurdle. The dam in Powell River once powered a paper mill that operated for more than a century. When the mill closed in 2021, the company shifted output south. What looked like an easy export is now tangled in questions about local development and energy sovereignty. This is where a regional dispute intersects directly with the larger politics of Trump's tariff era. Donald Trump's tariff program was meant to reinforce American control over supply chains, yet the result has been the opposite in many sectors, including energy. Duties of 25% to 50% on steel and aluminum raised construction costs for utilities, while added tariffs on copper and other metals slowed investment in new transmission lines and renewable projects. The U.S. Department of Energy reported in its summer 2025 review that grid expansion targets are already falling behind schedule. Those delays have made imports from Canada more valuable. Washington assumed those imports would be secure, but the Powell River case shows the weakness in that assumption. Canada is no longer treating electricity as an unlimited export. Communities and provincial agencies are pressing to keep more power at home. Trump's trade war has therefore created an energy paradox. By pushing up the cost of domestic projects, his tariffs make America more dependent on outside supply. And at the same time, they give Canada every reason to tighten its grip on what it sells abroad. The opposition in Powell River is not symbolic. The Tla'amin First Nation and the Cranberry Business Group are redeveloping the mill site, and their pitch to investors includes reliable access to local power. Residents have organized through Energy Democracy for BC, warning that no one can predict what the region's energy needs will be in 2055. Even the provincial utility, BC Hydro, has filed for access under federal fair market rules. This fight connects to a broader trend. Ottawa has launched major nation-building projects in energy and resources, from liquefied natural gas terminals in the Atlantic to cobalt refining in Ontario. These initiatives share a common goal: to capture more of the value chain inside Canada. The longer Trump pushes tariffs across the border, the stronger the incentive for Canada to build industries that use its own resources rather than shipping them to the United States. Powell River is one community, but its debate mirrors the direction of national policy. For the White House, the implications go beyond one license application. U.S. manufacturers in border states already face higher costs for power-intensive production. If Canada restricts long-term electricity exports, those costs will climb further. Trump's strategy was designed to assert leverage, but it has created the opposite dynamic. Canada is learning to conserve its own energy and resources, while the United States finds itself increasingly short of reliable supply. The Powell River proposal is still under review, with a new deadline for public feedback set for October 4. Yet the larger message is clear. A policy of tariffs and pressure was meant to guarantee American strength. Instead, it has encouraged Canadian communities to resist long-term deals and hold on to what they have. What began as a local dispute now stands as another example of how Trump's approach to trade and energy is backfiring, leaving the United States facing harder choices about its own security.
If you took away tariffs, we could end up being a third world country. We're leading because of tariffs.
President Trump has tied his economic vision to tariffs. He recently warned that without them, the United States could slip into becoming a third world country. That message came just days after a federal appeals court ruled that much of his program, built on emergency powers, was unlawful. The administration is appealing, but the stakes are high.
And those sweeping tariffs have collected so far $210 billion. Now, if this appeal by the administration does not ultimately stand and the administration has to cease collecting tariffs on October 14th or has to pay back those tariffs, that gets a bit complicated.
If the Supreme Court does not side with the White House, the government may have to refund more than $200 billion already collected from American importers and retailers. Canada is watching closely. Prime Minister Mark Carney reminded Canadians that 85% of trade with the United States remains tariff-free under the current agreement. He described this as the best deal in the world, while noting sensitive sectors such as steel, aluminum, forestry, autos, and copper that need attention. The contrast is clear. Trump frames tariffs as a shield against collapse, while Canada emphasizes stability and preparation. Even before the court ruling, stress was visible in the American economy. The July job openings and labor turnover survey from the Bureau of Labor Statistics showed 7.18 million jobs available against 7.2 million people seeking work. For the first time in years, job seekers outnumbered open positions. The same month's employment report revealed only 73,000 jobs created nationwide, a sharp slowdown. Industries felt the pressure unevenly. Healthcare and social assistance lost 181,000 job openings in July. Retail trade dropped by 110,000. Construction, manufacturing, and wholesale trade saw modest gains. These shifts highlight how Americans are finding it harder to secure steady work, just as tariffs raised costs for businesses. The uncertainty over whether tariffs will survive in court adds another layer of strain.
I last spoke to the president Monday evening. We spoke at length on a wide range of issues, including on trade, but geopolitical, other issues, labor issues, etc. It was a good conversation.
Against this backdrop, under Carney's leadership, Canada is strengthening key industries at home and preparing to expand its trade relationships beyond the U.S., while still keeping most cross-border commerce stable and tariff-free. Mark Carney has emphasized that the foundation of North American trade remains intact. By pointing to the 85% of commerce that flows tariff-free, he sends a message of reassurance to both Canadian industries and American partners. He acknowledges the trouble spots openly. Steel, aluminum, autos, and pharmaceuticals are under pressure from Washington's tariff focus. But rather than react with fiery rhetoric, his government is preparing for the scheduled review of the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement next year. Carney also revealed that he held a lengthy conversation with President Trump on the 1st of September, covering trade as well as geopolitical and labor issues. At the same time, Canada's top civil servant was in Washington meeting with American counterparts. This careful but active diplomacy underlines a key difference. Where Trump leans on drama and constant warnings, Canada relies on quiet engagement and strategic groundwork. The signal to Canadians is that their country is not powerless in the face of tariffs, but has tools, alliances, and preparation on its side. The clash of approaches could not be clearer. Trump's gamble is to hold up tariffs as the shield for American prosperity, even as courts challenge their legality, and labor data shows the strain. Canada, meanwhile, practices strategic patience. By emphasizing long-term stability, preparing for the CUSMA review, and keeping diplomatic channels open, Ottawa positions itself as the responsible partner in North America. The months ahead will test which strategy prevails. If tariffs are struck down or forced to be repaid, Trump's economic cornerstone could crack. If they survive, costs will still weigh heavily on U.S. businesses and consumers. Either way, Canada shows that it is ready, not just reacting. That steadiness may ultimately prove to be the stronger force in shaping the future of continental trade.
President Trump's 50% tariff on most imported copper products has fueled a surge in copper prices. While the import tax might not increase the production of the metal in the United States, it has led to another domestic spike: copper thefts.
When President Donald Trump announced a 50% tariff on imported copper products under Section 232, he framed it as a matter of national security aimed at China, the world's largest producer of refined copper. Yet the shock was felt most in the U.S. itself. Futures markets plunged, and the price gap between copper traded in the U.S. and London jumped to 31%, the highest ever recorded. Instead of stability, the policy created disruption and volatility. The most immediate impact was not a revival of U.S. copper production, but a rise in costs. Copper prices surged as much as 35% over the past year, according to CBS News, creating an unexpected side effect: a wave of copper thefts across the country. The U.S. National Insurance Crime Bureau estimates that copper theft has become a nearly $2 billion annual problem. From phone lines in California cut repeatedly by thieves to Los Angeles bridges stripped of copper wiring, the consequences have been severe. Local governments are spending millions to repair damages worth only a fraction of what the thieves gained on the black market. For manufacturers, the tariff means higher input costs for appliances, vehicles, and electronics, eroding competitiveness. Instead of reinforcing national security, the tariff has created insecurity at home, straining infrastructure and exposing communities to new risks. The intended shield for U.S. industry has turned into a domestic burden.
Canada produces a good amount of copper, but ships a lot of it off to Asia for processing, and then it goes into the United States. So maybe the impact is more on the U.S. consumer than on Canadian businesses.
Canada was quickly caught in the crossfire, since much of its copper is refined in Asia before entering the U.S. market. But Ottawa has not remained passive. More than 85% of bilateral trade continues tariff-free under CUSMA, giving Canada a base of stability. Prime Minister Mark Carney has pressed for diversification into Europe and Asia, while encouraging a buy-Canadian movement at home. Provinces have begun tearing down barriers to interprovincial trade, creating a stronger domestic market. Carney also suspended Canada's digital services tax, worth about $1 billion Canadian dollars annually, to keep negotiations with Washington open. At the same time, Canada continues to hold leverage in energy and critical minerals. By moving deliberately rather than reacting impulsively, Canada has shown it can turn pressure into opportunity. China, the intended target, has also found ways to adapt. The company Wellicent invested early in a factory in Grand Prairie, Texas, which will produce 3,000 tons of copper flat wire a year for clients such as Stellantis. Because production is inside the U.S., it avoids the tariff entirely. With $100 million of additional investment planned, the plant is expected to deliver more than half of the firm's overseas revenue within 3 years. A tariff designed to curb Chinese influence has instead created an opening for a Chinese company to profit on American soil. Globally, the copper market remains unstable. Analysts warn that the collapse in futures prices, combined with weaker demand in China, signals deflationary pressure, with risks spreading far beyond the metals sector. Trump's copper tariff was meant to showcase strength, but its effects tell another story. It has fueled crime and costs at home, pushed allies like Canada to strengthen their independence, and even allowed Chinese firms to find new advantages. Canada has responded with patience and strategy, proving it can defend its interests without losing its leverage. What remains clear is that the tariff has backfired, undermining the very goals it was meant to achieve.
The Trump administration expanding tariffs on steel and aluminum imports on Monday. The move adds a 50% tariff rate on more than 400 goods with steel and aluminum components.
It's going to mean higher canned food prices across the board for American consumers.
In mid-August, the White House dropped another surprise. Tariffs on steel and aluminum did not just double from 25% to 50% earlier this summer. They now cover more than 400 additional goods that contain these metals. Importers had no grace period. Products already on ships heading toward U.S. ports were instantly more expensive the moment the policy took effect. The list is long and familiar: wires and cables, car parts, home appliances, electronics, even soda cans, items that millions of Americans use every single day. For consumers, it means higher bills. For companies, it means uncertainty, because no one knows which category of goods might be targeted next. This sudden expansion shows how fast trade policy under President Trump can reshape the ground under households and industries alike. The impact is already visible in the numbers. According to the Producer Price Index released in late July, the price of domestic steel mill products was nearly 9% higher than a year earlier. Aluminum was up more than 13%. These are not abstract figures. They are costs that flow straight into the price tags of cars, refrigerators, and packaged food on grocery store shelves. Factories across the Midwest are feeling the strain.
Primary aluminum is something that's always going to be imported into the United States, no matter what kind of tariffs we put on whatever it is.
Manufacturers that rely on imported aluminum face higher costs, and they point out that certain types are not produced in the United States, so the tariffs add expense without offering a local alternative. Smaller firms cannot absorb the increases the way global corporations can. As they scale back, entire communities lose the stable jobs that have sustained American families for decades. Instead of sparking a manufacturing boom, the tariffs are placing new pressure on the very towns they were meant to protect. Across the border, Canada has been moving in the opposite direction.
We must reinforce our strength at home. Canada will be introducing a series of countermeasures to protect Canadian steel and aluminum workers and producers.
Ottawa responded quickly when Washington first raised tariffs earlier this year. By March, Canada had imposed its own 25% counter tariffs on about 30 billion Canadian dollars worth of U.S. goods, covering steel, aluminum, and a wide range of consumer products. But Canada did not stop there. It introduced tariff rate quotas that limit how much foreign steel can enter the country, and expanded procurement rules so that only Canadian firms or trusted partners can bid on government projects requiring steel and aluminum. The government also prepared financial support for major aluminum producers if U.S. tariffs remain in place, ensuring that companies like Rio Tinto can maintain operations and jobs. This approach has a clear goal. While tariffs raise costs, Canada is using the moment to strengthen its domestic industry, protect workers, and stabilize supply chains. Ottawa is signaling that it will not simply accept American pressure. It is defending its own market while keeping its industrial core intact. The contrast is striking. In the United States, tariffs were sold as a promise to bring jobs back and make industry stronger. Yet the evidence so far points in the other direction. Higher steel and aluminum costs are feeding into inflation, squeezing companies and forcing layoffs at manufacturing firms that rely on imported metals. For American households, everyday purchases from canned food to family cars are becoming more expensive. Canada, meanwhile, has acted quickly and decisively to protect its own producers. Rather than being cornered, it has turned the trade shock into an opportunity to reinforce its industry. The result is a tale of two strategies. One is creating turbulence for consumers and manufacturers at home. The other is building resilience in the face of pressure. This is the test of tariff politics. Pushed too far, short-term protection ends up hurting the very workers it promised to defend. Trump's trade policy now shows how protection can backfire, raising costs at home while unsettling global commerce.
35% tariff is now in place on some Canadian goods. And one Canadian industry that Washington has taken particular issue with is dairy.
In early August 2025, President Donald Trump took another step in his aggressive trade strategy. He raised tariffs on Canadian non-USMCA goods from 25% to 35%, escalating tensions at the border. Although the dairy sector itself is not directly hit by these new tariffs, Canada's dairy supply management system has long been a thorn in Trump's side. For years, he has portrayed it as an unfair barrier that protects Canadian farmers while limiting U.S. access to the market. Now, with broader tariffs in place and trade talks under strain, The question is whether Trump can force change in a policy Canada has vowed to defend at all costs.
Supply management is designed to protect dairy farms. There are limits to how much Canadian dairy farms can produce and how much from the United States can be imported to Canada.
Canada's supply management controls how much dairy is produced domestically and how much foreign product can enter the market. Imports from the U.S. are capped at roughly 3.5% of Canada's dairy market. If that limit is exceeded, tariffs skyrocket, 241% on milk and nearly 298.5% on butter, according to the Canadian Border Services Agency. The system has been in place for over 6 decades, designed to keep prices stable and protect thousands of family-run farms from being outcompeted by massive U.S. operations that can house tens of thousands of cows.
The dairy industry falls under CUSMA regulations, but U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly complained, saying it's an unfair deal for his country's producers.
From Washington's perspective, this is the very definition of a trade barrier. American producers already send about $800 million worth of dairy products to Canada annually, while Canada exports roughly $300 million in dairy south of the border. To Trump and his allies, the limits, and the high tariffs beyond them, mean lost opportunities for U.S. farmers. Just weeks before these latest tariff increases, Canada's parliament passed legislation that forbids using supply management as a bargaining chip in future trade negotiations. The bill enjoyed cross-party support, with advocates pointing to past trade deals where portions of the market were conceded despite political promises to protect it. Now, any government that wants to change the system would have to repeal the law and pay a steep political price. This protection isn't just about Quebec, the heartland of Canadian dairy. Farmers in British Columbia, Alberta, and even the Northwest Territories see supply management as essential for economic stability. It's a rare national consensus in an often divided political landscape. Canadian officials, including Prime Minister Mark Carney, know what's at stake. Loosening supply management too far could allow foreign dairy to take up to 18% of the domestic market, a level that industry groups warn would undermine the system entirely. That could mean farm closures, job losses, and declining rural economies. Beyond defending dairy, Canada has leverage of its own. The U.S. relies heavily on Canadian energy, critical minerals, and integrated auto supply chains. These sectors give Ottawa bargaining power that extends far beyond milk and butter. In trade talks, it's not just about defending one industry. It's about maintaining a balanced, mutually beneficial agreement. Trump may have expected the same playbook to work here as it has elsewhere: apply tariffs, demand changes, and secure a quick win. Instead, Canada's legal safeguards and political unity have slowed the process to a crawl. The dairy sector remains protected, with Ottawa signaling it is ready to walk away from a bad deal rather than concede on supply management. Meanwhile, U.S. dairy producers still face oversupply, volatile prices, and stiff competition abroad. Higher tariffs on other Canadian goods risk hurting American importers more than they help U.S. farmers, a reminder that not every bluff works in Washington's favor.